The arena thundered with the roars of 1,000 alien species as Zexthara adjusted her combat suit one final time. Her crimson scales gleamed under the harsh lights, each one a testament to her victories across 17 different worlds. The Cathurian warrior had never lost a match in the Galactic Combat Championships, and today would be no different. Or so she thought. Her opponent stood on the opposite platform, and Zexthara couldn't help but laugh. The creature was small, barely reaching her shoulder, with pale pink skin that looked as fragile as paper. No scales, no natural armor, no visible weapons. The humans had sent what appeared to be a youngling to face her. "Is this some kind of joke?" she hissed into her translator device, her forked tongue flicking the air with disdain. The human girl, for that's what the announcer had called her, simply rolled her shoulders and stretched her arms above her head. Sarah Chen had volunteered for this match when the Earth delegation realized they needed a representative for the combat trials. At 23, she was considered young even by human standards, but her background in mixed martial arts and her service in the Terran Defense Corps had caught the attention of the selection committee. "The rules are simple," the mechanical voice echoed across the arena. "Combat continues until one participant yields, is incapacitated, or dies. All natural abilities are permitted. Artificial enhancements are forbidden." Zexthara cracked her knuckles, each joint producing a sound like breaking stone. Her species had evolved on a high-gravity world where every creature was a predator. Her bones were dense as steel, her reflexes lightning fast, and her strength could crush most materials with ease. She had torn through opponents twice her size. Sarah bounced lightly on her feet, her movements fluid and relaxed. She wore simple gray training gear that seemed almost insulting compared to Zexthara's ornate battle armor. The human's dark eyes studied her opponent with an intensity that made several spectators shift uncomfortably in their seats. The starting bell rang with a deep, resonating tone that silenced the crowd. Zexthara launched herself forward with explosive speed, her claws extended and gleaming. She had ended fights with her opening move before, and this soft creature would be no different. The distance between them vanished in a heartbeat. But Sarah was no longer where she had been. The human had moved with impossible quickness, not just stepping aside, but flowing around Zexthara's attack like water around a stone. The Cathurian warrior felt nothing but air as her claws swept through empty space, and suddenly she was off balance, her momentum carrying her past her target. Sarah's fist connected with Zexthara's kidney, or what passed for a kidney in Cathurian anatomy. The impact shouldn't have done anything to a warrior of her caliber, but somehow it sent a shock of pain through her entire system. The human had struck with surgical precision, finding a nerve cluster that even Zexthara hadn't known was vulnerable. Recovering quickly, Zexthara spun around with a backhand that could have shattered concrete. Again, Sarah wasn't there. The human moved like a ghost, always a step ahead, always just out of reach. When she struck back, it was with devastating accuracy, pressure points, joint locks, nerve clusters that no alien species should have known existed. The crowd began to murmur. This wasn't how these matches usually went. Zexthara was known for her brutal efficiency, for ending fights before they truly began. But 10 minutes had passed, and not only was the human still standing, she seemed to be controlling the pace of the battle. Sarah's training had prepared her for this moment in ways that no one in the arena could understand. Humans were persistence hunters by evolution, creatures who could outlast prey that was faster, stronger, and better armed. They studied their enemies, learned their weaknesses, and adapted their tactics mid-fight. What the galaxy saw as weaknesses, their fragile appearance, their lack of natural weapons, humans had learned to turn into advantages. Zexthara was breathing hard now, her attacks becoming more desperate. Every time she thought she had cornered the human, Sarah would slip away and strike back with those precise, painful hits. The Cathurian's armor began to feel heavy, her movements sluggish. Sarah, meanwhile, seemed to be just warming up. Her breathing was steady, her movements becoming more confident with each exchange. She was reading Zexthara like a book, learning the patterns of her attacks, the rhythm of her defenses. The human was turning the fight into a deadly dance, and she was leading. The arena fell silent except for the sound of combat, the whistle of claws through air, the soft impact of flesh on armor, the increasingly labored breathing of the favored champion. Something unprecedented was happening in the arena, and no one quite knew what to make of it. Zexthara's vision began to blur around the edges. The human girl continued her relentless assault, not with overwhelming force, but with something far more terrifying: intelligence. Each strike was calculated, each movement purposeful. The Cathurian warrior realized with growing horror that she was being dissected, piece by piece, weakness by weakness. "What are you?" Zexthara gasped between attacks, her translator crackling with static from her labored breathing. Sarah didn't respond. She couldn't afford to. Every ounce of her concentration was focused on the fight, on reading the micro-expressions that flickered across her opponent's reptilian features, on tracking the slight favoring of Zexthara's left leg where she had landed that nerve strike early in the match. The crowd was no longer cheering. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy watched in stunned silence as their champion, their undefeated, unstoppable champion, was slowly, methodically broken down by a creature that looked like she belonged in a medical bay rather than a combat arena. Ambassador K-Tala of the hegemony leaned forward in his viewing box, his tentacles twitching with nervous energy. He had negotiated Earth's entry into these trials personally, expecting humanity to provide little more than entertainment value. Their species was new to the galactic community, barely a century off their home world, with no significant victories or achievements to speak of. Now he was watching one of their representatives dismantle the greatest warrior the Cathurian Empire had ever produced. "How is this possible?" whispered Dr. Vexney, the arena's chief medical officer. Her multiple eyes tracked Sarah's movements with professional fascination. "The human shows no enhancement signatures, no cybernetic implants. By all measurements, she should be dead within the first 30 seconds. What Dr. Vexney couldn't understand was that Sarah's greatest weapon wasn't her strength or speed, it was her brain. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters, but they had also evolved as problem solvers. Give a human an impossible challenge, and they would find 17 different ways to make it possible. Sarah had spent weeks studying footage of Cathurian physiology, learning their pressure points, their movement patterns, their psychological tells. She had sparred against training androids programmed with Zexthara's exact fighting style until she could counter every attack in her sleep. But more than that, Sarah understood something that the rest of the galaxy had failed to grasp about human warfare. It wasn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It was about being the most adaptable. Zexthara lunged again, desperation creeping into her attacks. Her claws scraped against the arena floor as Sarah sidestepped with minimal movement, conserving energy while her opponent exhausted herself. The human's hands moved like striking serpents, finding nerve clusters along Zexthara's neck that sent waves of numbness down her arms. "Impossible," Zexthara snarled, stumbling slightly. "No creature fights like this. What manner of predator are you?" This time Sarah did speak, her voice calm and steady despite the intensity of the combat. "We're not predators, we're survivors." The words sent a chill through the arena. There was something in the human's tone, something that spoke of a species that had clawed its way to the top of a hostile food chain through sheer determination and cunning. Zexthara's next attack was wild, uncontrolled. Sarah ducked under it and drove her elbow into the Cathurian's solar plexus. The impact folded Zexthara in half, but before she could fall, Sarah caught her opponent's head between her hands. For a moment, the two fighters were face to face, and Zexthara saw something in the human's eyes that made her blood freeze. There was no hatred there, no bloodlust, just a calm, calculating intelligence that evaluated her as a problem to be solved. Sarah's thumbs found pressure points along Zexthara's skull, and the Cathurian warrior's world exploded into pain and confusion. Not the clean pain of battle, but something deeper, a disruption of her nervous system that made her limbs feel like they belonged to someone else. The arena erupted in chaos. Several species representatives were on their feet demanding explanations. This wasn't how combat was supposed to work. Fights were won through strength, through superior weapons, through overwhelming force. They weren't won through the methodical application of anatomical knowledge and psychological warfare. But Ambassador K-Tala remained seated, his eyes fixed on the human girl. A smile played at the edges of his lipless mouth as understanding dawned. The galaxy had been asking the wrong questions about humanity. They had focused on human weakness, their fragile bodies, their short lifespans, their lack of natural weapons. They should have been asking about human strengths. Zexthara fell to her knees, her nervous system compromised beyond her ability to compensate. She tried to speak, to yield, but her voice wouldn't obey her commands. Her body was shutting down, one system at a time, under the precise application of pressure points that no alien species should have known existed. Sarah stepped back, her breathing still controlled, her stance still ready. She hadn't come here to humiliate her opponent or to prove human superiority. She had come to win, and winning meant using every advantage her species had developed over millions of years of evolution. The referee, a massive crystalline being from the Nexus Collective, approached cautiously. Its electromagnetic field pulsed with uncertainty as it tried to determine if the match was over. Zexthara was conscious but incapacitated, caught in a neural feedback loop that left her helpless without being technically defeated. And in the stunned silence that followed, Sarah Chen stood alone in the center of the arena, having just redefined what it meant to be dangerous in a galaxy full of warriors. The crystalline referee's electromagnetic field flickered through several colors as it processed what had just occurred. In 3 centuries of galactic combat trials, nothing like this had ever happened. Opponents were beaten unconscious, overwhelmed by superior firepower, or forced to yield through pain. They weren't methodically shut down like malfunctioning machinery. "The match is concluded," the referee announced, its voice resonating through multiple frequency ranges. "Winner, Sarah Chen of Earth." The arena remained silent for a heartbeat, then exploded into pandemonium. Representatives from dozens of species were on their feet, some cheering, others protesting, many simply staring in shock. The Cathurian delegation was conspicuously silent, their champion still kneeling in the center of the arena, slowly regaining control of her nervous system. Sarah helped Zexthara to her feet, an act of sportsmanship that seemed to confuse the alien warrior even more than her defeat. In Cathurian culture, the victor traditionally claimed a trophy from the vanquished, a scale, a claw, something to mark their dominance. The human girl simply offered her hand in what Sarah's translator identified as a gesture of respect. "How?" Zexthara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have trained since hatching. I have studied every fighting style known to the galaxy. How does a species like yours even survive in combat?" Sarah considered the question as she helped steady her opponent. "We don't fight to prove we're the strongest. We fight to go home alive." The simplicity of the statement belied its implications. The gathered dignitaries began to murmur among themselves as translation matrices worked overtime to convey concepts that many species had never encountered. The idea of combat as a tool for survival rather than dominance was foreign to most of the warrior cultures represented in the arena. Ambassador K. Tala made his way down to the arena floor, his tentacles rippling with what other species had learned to recognize as excitement. The hegemony had sponsored humanity's entry into the galactic community partly as a curiosity, partly as a potential client species. Now he was beginning to suspect they had discovered something far more valuable. "Miss Chen," he said, his translator rendering his liquid speech into crisp English, "that was perhaps the most educational combat display I have witnessed in my 3 centuries of life." Sarah removed her mouthguard and wiped sweat from her forehead. "It was just a fight, sir, nothing more." But Dr. Vexney, who had rushed down from the medical observation deck, was studying readouts from her scanning equipment with growing amazement. "Nothing more. Do you realize what you just accomplished? Your opponent possesses muscle density 3 times greater than yours, reflexes enhanced by a nervous system that operates at frequencies your species shouldn't even be able to perceive, and bone structure that should make her essentially immune to blunt force trauma." "Yes, ma'am, I read the briefings." "Then how?" "I adapted." Sarah's response was matter-of-fact, as if defeating the galaxy's greatest warrior through pure tactical thinking was the most natural thing in the world. "She was stronger and faster, so I made strength and speed irrelevant. She had better armor, so I found ways around it. She had more experience, so I used techniques she'd never encountered before." The concept was staggering to most of the assembled beings. In their experience, combat was about bringing your greatest strength to bear against your opponent's greatest weakness. The idea of systematically negating an enemy's advantages while maximizing your own was not unknown, but the level of analysis and adaptation Sarah had demonstrated was unprecedented. Zexthara, who had remained silent while medical scanners checked her nervous system, finally spoke up. "You studied me, not just my species, me specifically." Sarah nodded. "For 6 weeks, every match you'd fought, every technique you'd used, every pattern in your movement. I memorized your tells, your preferred combinations, the way you favor your right side when you're tired. That's impossible. No warrior has the time to. Humans do. The voice belonged to Dr. Lisa Park, Sarah's handler and the Earth delegation's chief analyst. She had been watching from the human viewing section, her tablet displaying real-time biometric data from both fighters. We're persistence hunters, warrior Zexthara. When we target something, we don't give up. We study it, we learn its patterns, and we outlast it. Ambassador Katala's tentacles were practically vibrating with excitement now. Dr. Park, am I to understand that this level of tactical analysis is standard for human military doctrine? Standard, this is basic training. Dr. Park's smile was polite but predatory. Sarah volunteered for this assignment because she wanted to test some theories about alien physiology. She's actually a combat medic in our defense corps, not a professional fighter. The implications hit the assembled dignitaries like a physical blow. If a medical technician could defeat their greatest warrior through preparation and analysis alone, what could their actual soldiers accomplish? Zexthara looked at Sarah with something approaching respect. You fight like the old stories describe the Void Stalkers, beings who could defeat any opponent not through strength, but through understanding them completely. We're not mythical creatures, Sarah replied, accepting a water bottle from Dr. Park. We're just good at learning. It's how we survived on a planet that tried to kill us every day for millions of years. The arena was slowly emptying, but the conversations that had begun here would continue for months in diplomatic circles across the galaxy. Several species representatives were already requesting private meetings with the Earth delegation, their minds racing with the implications of what they had witnessed. As Sarah walked toward the exit tunnel, Zexthara called out to her. Human, this was not a defeat. This was an education. I request the honor of training with your people. Sarah turned back, that same calm intelligence in her eyes. You'd be welcome on Earth, warrior Zexthara, but I should warn you, what you experienced today was just one human fighting conservatively in a controlled environment. The Cathurian warrior stood straighter, her scales gleaming with renewed purpose. Then perhaps it is time I learned what humans are truly capable of when they stop holding back. The human girl's smile was answer enough. 3 weeks after the arena match, Zexthara found herself aboard the Earth vessel Endurance, traveling toward humanity's home system. The ship itself was a revelation. Where most galactic vessels prioritized raw power or defensive capabilities, human ships seemed designed for something else entirely. Redundancy was built into every system, with backup systems for the backup systems, and fail-safes that activated when other species would have considered the situation hopeless. Your ship is strange, she told Captain Rodriguez during their daily briefing. It is not the fastest or the strongest vessel I have traveled in, but it feels durable. Captain Rodriguez, a weathered man in his 50s who had spent most of his career exploring the galaxy's more hostile regions, chuckled. That's the idea, warrior Zexthara. Human engineering isn't about being the best at any one thing. It's about still working when everything else has failed. The Cathurian warrior was beginning to understand that this philosophy extended far beyond their technology. During her stay on the ship, she had observed the crew's daily routines, and what she saw challenged everything she thought she knew about military organization. Human soldiers didn't just train to fight, they trained to think. Every enlisted member could perform multiple roles, adapt to changing circumstances, and make tactical decisions without waiting for orders from superiors. Where Cathurian military doctrine emphasized the chain of command and specialized roles, human doctrine emphasized flexibility and individual initiative. Today, we will show you something special, Sarah announced as she entered the ship's training bay. She had been assigned as Zexthara's primary instructor, a role that the Cathurian had initially found insulting. How could someone who looked like a young student teach a veteran warrior anything meaningful? Those assumptions had been shattered during their first sparring session. Sarah fought like liquid mercury, impossible to pin down, constantly adapting, turning every one of Zexthara's strengths against her. But more importantly, she taught while she fought, explaining the principles behind her techniques in a way that made the Cathurian feel like she was discovering entirely new approaches to combat. We're going to run a simulation, Sarah continued, gesturing to the holographic projectors that lined the training bay. You'll be commanding a squad of human soldiers against a superior enemy force. The scenario is based on an actual engagement from our colonial wars. The hologram flickered to life, showing a rocky landscape under an alien sun. Zexthara found herself in command of 12 human soldiers facing an enemy force of 30 hegemony heavy assault troops, crystalline beings whose natural armor made them nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons. "This is impossible," she stated immediately. "The tactical mathematics are clear. 12 soldiers cannot defeat 30 heavy assault troops in open terrain." "Show us," Sarah said simply. Zexthara approached the problem as she had been trained, analyzing enemy strengths and weaknesses, calculating optimal firing positions, planning frontal assaults and flanking maneuvers. Every strategy she devised resulted in the same outcome: total annihilation of the human forces within minutes. "The simulation is flawed," she declared after her fifth failed attempt. "No commander would accept such odds." "Actually, this is based on the Battle of Kepler Station," Lieutenant Hayes said, entering the bay with a cup of coffee. He was one of the soldiers who had fought in that engagement, and his casual demeanor despite discussing what should have been a massacre confused Zexthara even more. "We were outnumbered 30 to 12, just like in the sim." "And you retreated." "Retreated? Hell no, we won." Hayes' grin was infectious, and Zexthara found herself staring at him in disbelief. Sarah reset the simulation. "Try again, but this time don't think like a Cathurian warrior, think like a human." "I do not understand the difference." "Cathurians fight to prove their strength. Humans fight to achieve objectives." Sarah's voice took on the patient tone of a teacher explaining a fundamental concept. "You're trying to defeat the enemy, we try to complete the mission." The distinction seemed minor, but as Zexthara ran the simulation again, she began to see what Sarah meant. Instead of focusing on destroying the enemy force, she began to consider what the human objective might have been. The crystalline troops were guarding a supply depot. The humans needed to neutralize it, not necessarily by winning a pitched battle. Her next attempt involved using the terrain differently, not to gain tactical advantage in a fight, but to avoid fighting altogether. She had her simulated soldiers set demolition charges on unstable rock formations above the depot, bringing down an avalanche that buried the facility and most of the enemy force without firing a shot. "Better," Sarah acknowledged, but Lieutenant Hayes didn't have explosives that could bring down a mountainside. Zexthara tried again. This time, she focused on the enemy's psychology. Crystalline beings communicated through electromagnetic fields. What if those fields could be disrupted? She had her soldiers create electromagnetic interference using their equipment, then strike during the confusion when enemy coordination was compromised. Getting warmer, but the colonial Marines didn't have EMP weapons either. Frustration crept into Zexthara's voice. Then how did they win? What weapons did they have that could penetrate crystalline armor? Lieutenant Hayes finished his coffee and set down the cup. "None, that's why we didn't try to penetrate their armor." "That makes no sense." "Show her the real engagement," Sarah suggested. The simulation shifted, and Zexthara watched in amazement as the actual battle unfolded. The human soldiers didn't attack the crystalline troops directly. Instead, they attacked the ground beneath them. Using mining charges they had salvaged from the depot itself, they created a series of controlled collapses that dropped the entire enemy force into an underground cavern system. "You buried them alive." "We removed them from the battlefield," Lieutenant Hayes corrected. "The mission was to deny the enemy access to the supply depot. Once they were trapped underground, they couldn't access it. Mission accomplished." Zexthara stared at the simulation in wonder. This is not how warfare is conducted. This is not honorable combat." "No," Sarah agreed. "It's effective problem-solving. We didn't fight 30 enemies, we fought one problem, and we solved it using the tools available to us." The Cathurian warrior was beginning to understand why her species' first contact with humanity had resulted in such confusion among the galactic community. Every other spacefaring species had developed along predictable lines. They had become stronger, faster, more heavily armed, or more technologically advanced. Humans had become more adaptable. "Your people do not fight wars," she said slowly. "You solve them." "Now you're getting it," Lieutenant Hayes said with approval. "War isn't about who has the biggest guns or the strongest soldiers. It's about who can adapt fastest when things go wrong." And in a galaxy full of specialized warrior species, The humans had specialized in being unspecialized, capable of becoming whatever the situation demanded, using whatever tools were available, achieving objectives through methods that other species would never consider. Zexthara was beginning to suspect that her defeat in the arena had been far more significant than anyone realized. Zexthara's awakening was gradual, like surfacing from deep water. The familiar hum of the Endurance's engines had been replaced by the gentle sounds of wind through trees and the distant call of earth birds. She opened her eyes to find herself lying in a medical bay, but one unlike any she had seen before. The walls were lined with living plants, and natural sunlight streamed through transparent aluminum windows. "You've been asleep for 18 hours, Dr. Park said, looking up from her tablet. "The neural feedback loop you experienced during the match created some interesting side effects when combined with human medical treatment." The memories came flooding back in fragments. The arena, the fight, Sarah's impossible victory, the journey to Earth, but there were gaps, spaces in her recollection that felt like missing pieces of a puzzle. "What happened? I remember the training simulations, the discussions about human warfare, but then..." "Then you collapsed during a sparring session with Sarah." Dr. Park's expression was concerned, but not alarmed. "Your nervous system underwent some kind of cascade failure. We think it was related to the pressure point techniques she used during your match, combined with the stress of trying to adapt to human fighting methods." Zexthara sat up slowly, testing her reflexes. Everything seemed to be functioning normally, but something felt different. Her perceptions were sharper somehow, more nuanced. "Where am I?" "Earth, specifically the Terran Defense Corps training facility in Montana. You've been here for 3 days." Through the window, Zexthara could see rolling hills covered in grass that moved like green ocean waves in the wind. It was nothing like the rocky, high-gravity world of her birth, but there was something appealing about the gentle beauty of the landscape. "I had the strangest dreams," she said, trying to organize her thoughts. "I dreamed I was fighting Sarah again, but this time we were both human, and I was winning." Dr. Park exchanged a glance with Sarah, who had just entered the medical bay carrying 2 cups of coffee. "That's interesting. Tell me more about these dreams." "I understood things differently. The way you think, the way you approach problems. In the dream, I could see the patterns you use, not just in combat, but in everything. Your technology, your social structures, your military doctrine, everything connected to this central idea of adaptation and survival." Sarah handed her one of the coffee cups, and Zexthara was surprised to discover it had been prepared with the sugar and milk proportions she preferred. "The medical team thinks your nervous system may have been altered by our interaction in the arena. Nothing dangerous," Sarah added quickly, "but possibly beneficial. You might be processing information more like a human now." The implications were staggering. "You mean I can think like you do?" "To some extent, yes, but that's not why we brought you here." Sarah sat down across from her, her expression serious. "Zexthara, your government has declared war on the Terran Republic." The coffee cup fell from Zexthara's suddenly nerveless fingers. "What? But that's impossible. The Cathurian Empire has treaties with the hegemony, and they sponsored humanity's entry into the galactic community. We cannot declare war without." "The treaties were violated when you lost to me in the arena." Dr. Park's voice was gentle but firm. "According to Cathurian law, a defeat in honorable combat implies that the victor's species is superior. Your government couldn't accept that implication, so they declared the match invalid and demanded a rematch. When the Earth delegation refused," Sarah continued, "your military commanders interpreted it as an admission of deception. They believe we used some form of enhancement or trickery to achieve victory." Zexthara felt her world tilting on its axis. Everything she had learned about humanity over the past weeks, all the insights into their methods and philosophy, suddenly took on a darker significance. "They are planning to invade Earth. A battle fleet left Cathurian space 6 days ago. They'll arrive here in approximately 72 hours. The Cathurian warrior stood abruptly, her newly enhanced cognitive processes already working through the tactical implications. A Cathurian battle fleet was a formidable force, heavily armed, experienced in planetary assault, and commanded by warriors who had never known defeat. Against the small human fleet and their philosophy of adaptation and survival, the odds seemed insurmountable. But then she remembered the simulation exercises, the impossible victories achieved through unconventional thinking. What is humanity's response? Sarah's smile was cold and calculating. We're going to teach them the same lesson you learned in the arena. You cannot be serious. A battle fleet is not a single warrior that can be defeated through pressure points and nerve strikes. No, Dr. Park agreed. But the principles are the same. Study your opponent, identify their weaknesses, adapt your strategy to neutralize their advantages. Zexthara's enhanced cognition began to see the patterns. You have been studying Cathurian military doctrine. For the past 6 days, yes. Every battle they've fought, every tactic they've used, every pattern in their strategic thinking. We know how they approach warfare, and we know how to counter it. But you are still outnumbered and outgunned. So were the 12 soldiers at Kepler Station. Lieutenant Hayes had joined them, along with several other members of the endurance crew. The question isn't whether we can beat them in a fair fight. The question is whether we can complete our objective. Which is... Sarah stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the peaceful Earth landscape. To convince them that declaring war on humanity was the worst mistake they ever made. Not by destroying their fleet, that would just make them send a bigger one, but by demonstrating that human ingenuity makes conventional warfare obsolete. Zexthara felt a chill run down her spine as she realized what she was hearing. The humans weren't planning to fight the Cathurian fleet. They were planning to educate it, just as they had educated her. And if her own experience was any indication, the lesson would be unforgettable. You want me to help you? We want you to choose a side, Sarah said simply. You can return to your fleet and warn them about what they're walking into, or you can stay here and help us find a solution that doesn't end with unnecessary bloodshed. Zexthara looked around at the humans who had become her teachers, her friends, and in some strange way, her family. She thought about the warrior she had been before entering that arena and the person she was becoming now. The choice was easier than she had expected. Tell me about this plan of yours, she said, settling back into her chair. And please make the coffee stronger. I have a feeling we are going to need it. Outside the window, Earth continued its peaceful rotation, while somewhere in the depths of space, a Cathurian battle fleet approached, completely unaware that they were about to discover what happened when humanity stopped holding back.